Mr. Price, please approach the podium and state your name and address for the record.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, my name is Matt Price, here today on behalf of Pulte Homes and Little League International. We had a meeting during the May 9 regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals, and we're asked to do several things in following up on that. We have had an opportunity to meet with some of the neighbors. Not everyone would like to continue to work on our proposal and believe we need an additional 30 days continuance.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Price. For the record, we're very encouraging of having petitioners work with neighbors and try to work through issues so that there's something that everybody's comfortable with. So we're certainly supportive of that effort. Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, if I could too, I did have
Sure.
Dave Houseknecht from Little League International here tonight, and he had just a brief statement that if it's with your permission, he wanted to read in connection with our request.
For the record, my name is Dave Houseknecht. I'm the Senior Vice President of Administration, Chief Financial Officer for Little League Baseball and Softball. I have a statement from Stephen Keener, Little League President and Chief Executive Officer, regarding the relocation of the Little League Central Region headquarters. When Little League International announced its decision to relocate to Zionsville, we were welcomed with great enthusiasm. We take pride in being a community-based organization and a place where people can come together to provide children an enjoyable, meaningful activity. Through the relocation process, we have become increasingly aware of the animosity and ill feelings from the Zionsville community toward the proposed site for our potential relocation. We greatly appreciate the hard work of the Zionsville Local Organizing Committee and Pulte Homes of Indiana in providing a potential solution for our new regional headquarters. However, while the continuance of this proposal is being considered, Little League International believes it is in everyone's best interest to begin exploring other options within Zionsville, exploring other options both with the Zionsville Local Organizing Committee and potentially elsewhere in our central region. We thank Pulte Homes for their willingness to support Little League International through this process and are grateful for its attempt to find us appropriate location for our new Central Region headquarters in Zionsville.
Okay,
Thank you
very much. Appreciate that. So we've got a request to continue this petition to the July 10th meeting. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
I move that docket number 2018-12-DSV, Pulte Homes petition, be continued to the July 9th, 10th meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Price. See you next month. Any other continuance requests? Hearing none, we'll move on to continued business. The first, after we take a brief break.
I was just informed of that.
I just looked up.
You just did? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, everybody, if we could focus on our next item. We've got docket number 2018-05-DSV, ZCS wireless telecommunications structure. If you'd please approach the petitioner, approach the podium and state your name and address for the record.
My name is Jim Budenbaum, 251 North Illinois Street, Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm here on behalf of Crown Castle USA, as well as the Zionsville Community Schools. whom we have leased the proposed site. I'm not sure if you can hear me with that.
Yeah, no,
Wait a second.
that would be great. Thank you, gentlemen, for helping with the doors. Okay, Mr. Bunbaum.
We are proposing a 125-foot cellular antenna support structure at 4400 South 875 East. It is generally, I think, regarded as a school property where they have multiple ball diamonds. I think there's 2 baseball diamonds, 2 softball diamonds, as well as there's an extensive indoor and outdoor tennis facility right there in the general vicinity, although I think that's operated by a different organization. We're going to locate the site as close to the center of the property as we can. Just to be clear, it's a 120-foot support structure with a 5-foot lightning rod at the top. The 5-foot lightning rod at the top is what requires us to get a variance of the developmental standards. We're seeking a special exception under the Zionsville ordinance for the antenna structure. The structure will be located, just to give some perspective, and it's in many of the materials that we've provided, the site plans. We are 430.58 feet from the west property line, 518.42 feet from the south property line, 937.83 feet from the center line of 875. I didn't have the actual edge of the property, but the center line of 875, and approximately 1,000 feet from the property line to the north. There'll be no lights, noxious noises or sounds that come from this site, other than there will be a small security lighting array that you can see, and I believe it appears on page P8. There's some more of it on page P7. It's simply put, it's a motion detected light system that's inside of the fenced area. The staff recommends approval of this site. I believe that the operators of the tennis facility also support the site because of the need. There's many details regarding the development plan of the site, which are subject to the Plan Commission's approval. Be glad to answer questions about that. I don't want to sideline the BZA, but I did want to say, if this is approved tonight, we will go to the Plan Commission for exact site plan or development plan approvals, including the fencing, if they want to change the fencing that we propose, the landscaping that we propose, those sort of things. And if you want to bring those up, we're happy to answer questions about that as well.
Mr. Bunbaum, what other locations did your client consider for this cell tower?
Well, I'm going to have to ask Mr. Crow to come up here to answer that question. Tom Crow with Crown Castle is here, because I'm not involved in that and I don't want to be inaccurate.
My name's Tom Crow, a project manager with Crown Castle here in Indianapolis, Indiana. Verizon asked us that they presented this property to us, and we accepted it, given it's a good location in the surrounding area for this tower. There's 2 parcels that the school owns. Another candidate was just the parcel to the north. Same complex, but that was 2 parcels, so that was another candidate. And then I'm not sure, that's the only 2 I'm aware of. We picked
So
this
you
area.
primarily talked to the school system about their
Correct.
available property.
Correct, and because it's such a large parcel, we can be set back from property lines quite a ways, and that's why we picked this location.
But, and we can understand the need for additional cell service in the area. We got the supporter last time that talked about the importance of getting data to the tennis facility, and understand that there's going to be additional residential real estate development that's going to have a greater demand. All that makes sense. The question is, why do we have to have this cell tower in the place that you have suggested to place it?
So when they lay out these cell towers, they have to be contiguous. So this tower is it's the almost exact middle of a tower to the northwest, a tower to the northeast, the tower that's right here next to this facility, and then there's going to be another tower to the southwest that they're developing. So this site actually happens to be right in the middle. They do have to be a certain distance apart, so it provides contiguous coverage. You get them too far apart, you don't have that contiguous coverage, and service is not adequate.
So you said they're developing another tower to the southwest?
Well, that's in Whitestown's jurisdiction. It's west of I-65.
But certainly there's some flexibility in placing it further north of where this particular site is.
We did provide a map in there where they're located.
And make sure to continue to speak.
I'm sorry, we did provide a map there in your packet. And, yeah, I mean, you could move it some to the north, but I mean, this was the ideal location. We
Well,
felt
not so much just on the school property. So, but first, let me pause for a moment and welcome Mrs. Evinger. Thank you, Mrs. Evinger, for the record. It's good to see you. So our ordinance tells us that the town council has said, to the extent possible, we shouldn't put telecommunication towers in a way that impacts the view shed of historically significant structures. Okay. So with that in mind, what else did you consider that would put this cell tower, which we understand there's a need for cell service currently, and there's a future projected need. Where else did you consider putting it? Because there's a whole bunch of vacant space to the north, right? Where else did you consider putting it that would meet the engineering needs, but that wouldn't have that adverse impact on the historic structure?
It was mainly these search rings, as they're called, are not very big anymore because of the cell towers that are existing. So it's kind of tight where they can put these. The school property posed a good location, whether it's the parcel we're on or the parcel to the north. The RF engineers decided this parcel to the south was the best to connect with the towers to the southeast. Eventually, they're moving to the southwest. And again, we're equal distance for the northeast and northwest. It's a pretty ideal location from a RF perspective. It's also a good location because we've already got tall structures there. I mean, there's 15 or 18 light standards that are 65 feet tall there. And it's a large parcel where we can be quite a ways from any property. So that's why we picked this location, large parcel, we're away from property lines, have existing tall structures there. And it meets the needs for the RF to connect to each tower that we're trying to offload in that area. There's been increased demand in that area, and that's what's driving the need for the new tower.
Yeah, I guess, again, our ordinance tells us that to the extent possible, we shouldn't place cell towers in a way that impacts the view shed from historically significant structures. I hear you saying you guys like this particular location. That's understandable. But in light of the town council passing an ordinance that tells us that we're not supposed to do this to historic structures, we should be pushing you to explore other alternatives. And if that's the difference between, this, and you'd have to quantify that for us, that you've looked and here's another option, or you've considered these other several options, and this one may be only 97% good, where this particular parcel was 99% good. But we have to live within what the town council has provided us, that they've said they value these historic structures, and we shouldn't be putting cell towers in a way that impacts their view shed.
So we don't want to impact the country scenic view of the historic property. That's what you're saying, correct?
Yes, I can read it to you if you want me to, but,
Well, I guess we're putting up one more pole amongst 18 that are out there already. And the property around that historic property is zoned residential to be developed, I'm sure, in the near future. And there's going to be multiple homes there, which then will block out the view of any of those tall structures out there.
right. So
And then
the
a
structure
minute-
you're proposing is twice as tall as all the light structures. And the argument that there's already junk out there, we put one more thing, nobody's going to notice, when it isn't really a legitimate argument. Because certainly it's less impactful than if there was nothing out there, if you were the first tall structure. But nevertheless, we've got an ordinance that tells us we should do what we can to avoid doing what you're asking us to approve. And I'm asking you, what alternatives have you considered that would allow us to honor the terms of the ordinance?
The two parcels of the school. There may have been a third that I'm not aware of that Verizon's site acquisition folks may have looked at. But the two parcels of the school is what we considered, given the nature of the parcels that were there, the size of those parcels, the location we needed to be in between the existing towers. It really fits our needs and for the demand in the area. We are 1,000 feet away from the historic property at this point, or fairly close to that. Does the ordinance state a distance that you need to be from there?
No, it says place telecommunication towers to ensure that historically significant landscapes are protected. The views of and vistas from architecturally or historically significant structures should not be impaired or diminished by the placement of telecommunication towers. So that's what we're.
Yeah, and then, that's, I guess, where I'm coming from. There has been a precedent set out there with the light standards that are there. It's not the farm setting that it used to be. There's residential development going on to the parcel to the west of the adjacent parcel to the school property. It's kind of been changed already, and then if you're going to build residential properties right up against the property line, and new subdivisions, I think our tower is going to get lost in that once there's new subdivisions all the way around it.
The ordinance also contemplates in another part of it the effort that needs to be made by the telecommunications provider to search out other alternatives that are least impactful. Specifically in section B2, it says that the wireless telecommunications facility provider shall demonstrate that they have exhausted all efforts to locate the proposed telecommunications antennas upon existing buildings or structures in the geographical area of the proposed telecommunications antennas, which is, you're supposed to be working hard to minimize impact. What I've heard you say is you guys considered a couple spots, and in light of the mandate that we have from the ordinance, that's likely not good enough.
We build towers for co-location. So the tower that would go up is designed to handle 3 more carriers. There's 4 major carriers in the country. So you wouldn't need another tower for those additional carriers. Verizon always looks to co-locate first. There is no tall existing structures out there. The 66-foot tall structures, however, they're not substantial. They're made for lights and lights only. So that's why we kind of put it in the mixer there, but we did exhaust that. There's no water towers out there. There's no grain elevators out there, anything like that. It's pretty flat farm ground.
No, and I appreciate that. But that provision reads not only to the effort of trying to identify other facilities to place the tower on, but also the need to look expansively to find something that has the least impact.
And that's why we
But
picked
that
this
also
spot here.
works.
Because we got ball diamonds with light towers that, lucky for us, is in the middle of our existing towers that we had spaces like that. The tower to the northeast is out away from all, any new development. Tower up there is in Whitestown. It's actually in Whitestown.
And I get all that,
Those
but
fit-
the unlucky thing is that your one spot that you like is right in the view shed of this historically significant structure.
And we're working with, we will be submitting something to SHPO, but.
Which is the State
I
Historic
understand
Preservation
that,
Officer.
but I believe we are going to get a no adverse effect from that. So that's what we're working towards.
But as you know, the National Historic Preservation Act is the federal level of historic preservation. Then there's a state level of historic preservation, and there's a local level
Sure.
of historic preservation. So our town council has deemed it significant enough as a local jurisdiction to say that we should not be putting telecommunication towers in a location that impairs the view shed from a historically significant structure. We're not going to, we haven't deferred that to the state or the feds. The town said that's important to them.
Mr. Chairman, I agree, and I know that I've looked at the ordinance since our first meeting a couple of months ago, and I agree that we should try to do that the best that we can. I guess the question in my mind is, are we really negatively affecting the historic nature of that when we're located the distance that we are from it? Again, let me just add that I think one thing Mr. Crow didn't say, which is that this is the location that the school system preferred us to locate at, probably because the property that's to the north has probably been earmarked for development of actual educational facilities, I assume, because it's a pretty big piece of property. I don't know the answer to that, but this is the location. Whether we've affected the historic nature of that site, I mean, I would just say that there's another historic farm property, I believe, that's very close to a school system in the community, as I understand it, and I don't think it's negatively affected that as well.
Well, again, the language that we're looking at in the ordinance is specific to telecommunication towers. So
Understand.
the town council said, we care about this as it relates to telecommunication towers. And it talks about the views of and vistas from the architecturally or historically significant structures should not be impaired or diminished, which means reduced. So even if your argument, Mr. Crow, is it's already reduced, this would reduce it further by bringing in a structure of twice the height. And Mr. Benbaum, your universe of available properties isn't limited to the school system.
No, it is not, but it is, when I've done this for a long time, and I'll just tell you, when cell sites are looked for sites, you got several things you got to look at. Available zoning, so rather than getting a variance of use, it's better if you go to a site from a zoning standpoint that requires perhaps a special use exception, because by its very nature, it's a less onerous kind of thing asking the community to do. The second thing is finding a location for which there's a willing property owner who's willing to either sell or lease the property. So that's the second criteria. And then the third one is finding one that just compared to the rest of the options that are available is one that's the least obtrusive. And I'm not going to stand up here and say that the people won't initially notice the cell tower and that it might appear to be obtrusive. We are proposing to put closed mount antennas on it to sort of shrink the size of what the antennas look like on the structure. But in terms of this community and the comprehensive plan for this particular area, which is going to be intense residential, and it should be because it's beautiful property. It's got a nice roll to it, which I think will help as well from the historic standpoint, because the historic property is on a hill. But it is the least obtrusive. There's just not that many options without us putting an antenna right in someone's backyard or closer to someone's yard. We've got this huge expanse. None of them have been perfect ever. I've done it for 25 years. Not a single one's been perfect. And I think that's kind of how it is. And I apologize, there's not a better answer.
Right. And you just mentioned another point I wanted to get to, and we talked about this the last time. Have you guys submitted the master plan for the wireless telecommunication facilities throughout the town that's contemplated by the ordinance?
Yes. In the last packet that was, I believe, presented to you, we presented to the Plan Commission, Exhibits A, B1, and B2 represent that master plan. The concept of the master plan is kind of morphed. When we first were building cell towers out, it was just about getting radio frequency, and literally the word cellular means that each tower was a cell, and they'd all interconnect and fit just perfect, and they'd cover 3 to 5 miles or so. Now it's become, as B1 describes, this really is driven by demand and anticipated demand in this area because of the nature of the residential development that's obviously going to happen. Cell phones, as we've said before, I think we said this, less than 50% of the people in this country now have landlines, so they use cell phones as their primary source of telephony, as well as their primary source, many people, as their primary source of data interaction, be it email, Facebook, or otherwise. And so when you're sitting in your home, it's more difficult than if you're in a car. If this makes sense, I'll explain it real briefly. You're sitting in your home, you've got the home structure all around you, the radio frequency doesn't penetrate as easy.
Right, so
if you're in your car, it penetrates easier, and you're going from cell tower to cell tower, whether it be highway or otherwise.
I totally get the need for additional facilities in this area. The question is, does it have to be here? Your answer was no, that this particular piece of property works well for this use. You've considered at least one or two others. You haven't exhausted what's available. And as a result of that, and with an ordinance that tells us we're supposed to protect the view shed from historically significant structures, the answer is you've got more work to do.
Well,
So we need a definition of what's your definition of affecting that historic view shed?
Well, there's no objective criteria. Provide you. We can quote the Supreme Court if you want and say we'll know it when we see it.
Hopefully we're not. Hopefully we're not the same as that.
Yeah, which was in a case in a different context. But
I would.
So if we move to the next property over, you could say the same thing. If we moved 400 feet north, you could say the same thing.
If you move a half a mile to the north, we would not be able to say the same thing.
A half a mile to the north.
Think about it. We're both reading the same language, right?
But
it's not, can you not see it? So if there's some little blip on the horizon that could be whatever, that's very different from something that's 125 feet tall, twice the size of the 65-foot tall lighting structures that's like in the backyard of this historically significant structure. And we're not dreaming this up. So the town council said this is important to them, and our job is to help enforce our ordinance. And so we're supportive of additional facilities. The challenge to you guys is try to find a location that works that doesn't have this adverse impact. Any other questions or comments?
I guess my comment would be, the term view shed to me should not mean a half-mile diameter circle around a property.
I just totally threw that out. I cannot, my sense is that half a mile away, this would not be.
No, it's a quarter mile away. But the view shed then from the property becomes a half mile.
Well, it depends upon what
and I think
the
that's a little,
is.
Well, exactly. And that's the point he was just making, that as the landscape around this historic location changes, so will what we will consider to be the view shed, and it'll most likely shrink. If this historical property was located in woods, their view shed might be 50 feet. But since it's located on top of a hill, on top of a farm field, and most likely the farm field is going to get turned into houses, currently it's 1,000 feet. 5 years from now, it might be 200 feet.
And we'll have a different discussion in 5 years from now. I mean, you know the language we're
Understand.
challenged to deal with, and we're supportive of the additional telecommunications facilities, but why here? Have they exhausted the efforts to find another spot that works for them that doesn't have this adverse impact? And the answer is no, they haven't exhausted that yet. They talked to the school district, who said, we've got 2 different parcels for you, which is nice, and it would be great if it worked at the school district. And if we didn't have this historic structure just plop right there, this would be a no-brainer.
Let me just add one really. We provided photo simulations of a tower from different directions. Does everybody have those? I'll just show you what they look like. It starts out with a map that looks like this. It's got dots on it, shows you where we, and then the first picture in each one of them will be without the proposed structure, and then the second one is with. So I submit to you, I guess it's on the same theme as to whether, in fact, we are negatively affecting the view shed from the historic structure once you look at those photo sims. And I know it's a matter of opinion, but I'm just pointing out additional evidence that, in my belief, shows some evidence that it doesn't. I think all structures that stick up above the trees probably, no matter what it is, light standards, the 120-foot electric transmission lines that are approximately 1,000 feet east or west of this site, all of those negatively affect view sheds of all kinds.
No, I hear you. If you look at your location number 3, which I think is probably the closest to the potential view shed from this farmhouse,
And we didn't do it from the farmhouse because it seemed obvious that the barn blocked the view, was one thing. I mean, it was kind of an unfair shot. You wouldn't see anything. So if you went right in front of, we couldn't go on the property, we didn't want to do that, but if you went in front of that property where the barn and the house are, you can't.
On the road.
Yeah, it would be an unfair picture for us to present because it doesn't show you anything.
But that one shows you the significance of this particular structure to it. But the bottom line is, we understand the need for additional facilities, but you have to put it here. The answer is, at least right now, no. You've got other options, you just haven't exhausted that effort.
Let me just.
So we've got a town council that's told us that the view shed from historically significant structures is important. We're to protect it. So that means you've got more work to do.
Let me just, Mr. Chair, let me ask one question. Are you suggesting moving on the school property?
Probably not.
Okay.
Even if that's 500 feet north, 1,000 feet north.
I don't know what that would. I don't know what that would look like.
We could go exhaust and find another one, and you say, well, that doesn't meet it. I mean, there's no criteria in here. You're kind of singling out cell towers, and then you're not given any kind of criteria.
Hey, I'm not singling out cell towers.
Well, the ordinance
town
does.
council, in their
I understand
wisdom,
that.
right, has signaled you guys out. You're special. That's great. So if you looked at your view location number 3 photo, and I welcome you guys to provide some thoughts here too. I mean, there are little itty bitty things in the background. You see those? I don't know, how can I describe those, Steve? These little.
Yeah, number 3 is from the south property line, so it's sort of the property line between our site and I think the site that's the historic site.
Right, so I think this is the most relevant from the view shed perspective of these
That's
photos.
500 feet from away from where we're going to be.
So if you look at the smaller little things out in the distance, those could, I mean, that's not impacting the view shed.
Well, I think those small things you're looking at are these light standards further away. There's another set of them to the north.
Well, some of them, and then there's other little things out there. I don't know what that stuff
I
is.
think that those are light structures at a little further point.
Yeah.
So eventually, if you get far enough away, even with a 125-foot tower, it looks pretty tiny compared to something that's much closer, but not nearly as tall.
And so this picture was taken approximately 500 feet away from where our proposed tower is going to go. And then there's an additional 400 feet or so to the historic property. So I'm not sure of that measurement.
Okay.
Because there is a parcel between the school property and the historic property.
There is.
Yeah. And that's the one that's zoned residential.
Got it. So I'm just telling you that our ordinance tells us we're not supposed to impact the view shed of historic structures. The ordinance says that telecommunications providers should be exhausting themselves to find a location that minimizes adverse impacts as identified in the ordinance. You've told us you've looked at 2 sites owned by the school district. I understand why they're attractive, but that is not exhausting your
Well,
efforts.
in addition, you know, Mr. Budenbaum indicated you got to find a willing landowner.
Right.
We can't just put it on any property we want.
No, I know.
So if we moved to the north and the west, that landowner may not be amenable to doing a lease with us.
Right, no, yeah, there's all types of additional property to
Then
the
you get
north
too
and
far
west.
away, it doesn't work for us.
But I think the end of that story is if you look at all the surrounding properties and none of those work, then we know you have done an exhaustive search and we now have the only option available to us, which I believe is close to what the ordinance is telling you to do.
Right, we get the need. The question is, can you do it anywhere else that doesn't have this adverse impact? That's what we've been challenged to do, and we're engaging with you on that. And you've said, hey, there's a lot of reasons why this property is great. Okay, I hear that. But where else have you looked that could meet your needs that doesn't have this adverse impact? And that's what we're challenging you to do. Any other questions or comments? Any remonstrators want to speak tonight? Mr. Peters, please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Tom Peters, 8437 East 500 South. We also own the farmland directly south of the school-owned property where this cell tower has been proposed. Again, I'll amend my comments because of the discussion that's already taken place, but we have 2 major objections. Mr. Moracle and the group has already covered the zoning ordinance and the views and vistas from architecturally significant properties. But the other important reason why this petition should be denied is that our property value will be diminished greatly by having a huge cell tower right next to it. There are multiple studies showing this. Before the April meeting, I was out of town and submitted an email that all of you got. There's a lot of other studies showing 10, 20% reduction of property value. I don't want to take up everybody's time. I know everybody's bored with this first issue. But, and then as far as, I have a quick checklist to go down because they presented a lot of information to the on paper, and you discussed some of this, but quickly, Exhibit A has to do with the master plan, as they called it. This was the map of existing cell towers. I want to point out that not shown on that map, there is a cell tower on the the old Union Elementary School up on Highway 32 that's not on that map. I don't know if there are other omissions and errors, but there's at least one. Also in the packet that they submitted, there's a letter from a Verizon engineer. This gets to Mr. Moracle's point. She stated that she thinks that this is an adequate site, but nowhere in that letter does she say that it's the only site that would work. They also, in their submission, responded to my communication with the board that where I had quoted the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development saying that cell towers were defined as hazards and nuisances. In their written submission, they said that they had trouble finding that, which is interesting because just 2 sentences above the line that they quoted is the line in the HUD HOC reference guide saying for dwellings outside an easement, quote, the appraiser is instructed to note and comment on the effect on marketability resulting from the proximity to such hazards and nuisances. So the United States federal government agency does in fact define cell towers as hazards and nuisances, and the U.S. government agency does believe that their presence on adjacent property does affect marketability. So that would be another reason to reject this proposal, because again, our land directly adjacent to this property, where again they misstated, they said they're placing it right in the middle of school property. It's at the very southern tip, as you had already pointed out. Again, I'm kind of going through this quickly because some things have been commented on. The images that they presented, the 2-dimensional artificial images, photoshopped images. Remember, we live in a 3-dimensional world, so those don't really show the true impact that such a huge structure would have on adjacent property owners. As Mr. Moracle pointed out, width of these is much greater. The height is about twice as high as the baseball standards. I won't go through the prior Brock farmstead again, but then I'm almost done. To bring some timely local perspective to this discussion, the Whitestown Plan Commission recently heard a proposal for a cell tower out just west of the Golf Club of Indiana, and the Plan Commission didn't vote on it because they were concerned about, the staff actually said they were concerned about the negative effect rezoning the land would have on neighboring parcels. And one of the plan commissioners was quoted in the paper, I think it does negatively affect neighboring properties. And that Whitestown cell tower proposal went to the Whitestown Town Council, and it was defeated 5-0. So in addition to the prior Brock homestead issue or farmstead issue, there's also the very important effect on neighboring property values. So I would suggest that these petitioners in the future, if they're going to, it's their business, they will be doing it in the future, but I would suggest that they would honestly discuss their potential plans with all neighboring property owners in advance of their proposals. Thank you. Any questions for me?
Any questions for Mr. Peters? Thank you, Mr. Peters. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak briefly tonight?
Yes, good evening. My name is Joe Amrine. I live at 8602 East, 500 South, also known as the Prior Brock Farmstead. So I'm the owner of the historic property that we've been discussing this evening, and this is the first I've heard of it. So I have been denied the opportunity to research the cell tower, any impact that it might have on the view from the historic property. And since I've been denied the ability to look at the impact of this cell tower, the organization that is tasked with overseeing the maintenance of that historical property, Indiana Landmarks, they have been denied the opportunity to provide input on any impact that the cell tower may have on the property or the view of the property or the view from the property. Okay. So the historic property it's on the federal registry, it's on the state registry, there are local ordinances that you've mentioned, but there's also the private organization of Indiana Landmarks that has a set of covenants on file with the Boone County Courthouse, and they have not, and I'm sure they'd be interested, although I probably shouldn't speak for them, but they might have an interest in this cell tower. So I'm requesting that it be denied because we haven't had the opportunity to investigate it.
Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Anybody else care to speak on this matter? Hearing none, may we have the staff report, please?
Thank you. As stated, staff is supportive of this cell tower. Certainly, there's a lot of conversation specific to the approach and the location. Certainly, the folding all of the ordinance requirements into how a project like this were to be executed. Certainly, the petitioner has had opportunity to work through the language in the ordinance, provided the information that you need. Certainly, it sounds like there's a continued willingness to review and provide back to you the conclusion of their research as to eliminating other sites. And if that can be reached, then the petition could move forward.
Thank you, Wayne. Any questions for staff?
Wayne, sorry to put you on the spot. Are you aware of any conversations inside the town council or at the mayor's office about this Sudtel ordinances? Or not aware of any changes that may be coming forth? Or
No, I mean, this, as Mr. Buddenbaum indicated, this is an ordinance, and maybe it was the previous hearing, where the towns and other jurisdictions adopted a very similar ordinance throughout the state, and the language here in this particular ordinance has not changed in a decade or longer. There is some antiquated language, specifically to the master plans and how those are even executed by cell tower providers or actually the wireless providers. But I'm not aware of any particular changes that are being thought of.
Thank you, Wayne. Any further questions for staff?
Yeah, Wayne, is it not necessary that the petitioner notifies surrounding property owners?
Oh, no, that's a local requirement that adjacent property owners receive notice beyond state statute, which requires the publication of the notice. So I'm not aware of any notice issues.
Maybe I misunderstood the landowner's complaint that he wasn't unaware of it and therefore had not had an opportunity to research that.
Well, I'm happy to pull the property or the mail cards to see what we have.
I think that's okay, Wayne. We'll move on.
I think we'd have to have the answer tonight.
Any other questions for staff? So we've got a number of issues in front of us, including the historic preservation issue and the argument that the petitioner would not have met its burden, that the variance would not have a substantially adverse impact on the neighboring property owner's value. I think it's relatively clear that under the circumstances, the petitioner hasn't done what they need to do to identify other potential sites that would meet their needs and would not have the adverse impact on the view shed. And for that reason alone, without even having to consider at this time whether there is an adverse impact on property values, that we should deny this.
If they were to find a new location, it would require that they file separately again, so continuing would do no good. Am I correct?
Yeah, it's going to be, as Mr. Bunbaum said, it'll be whatever the circumstances are for that particular piece of property would dictate what requirements they might have.
So the view shed is a 360-degree view shed, though, correct? It's not just looking out the rear of the property?
Or the window or whatever, yeah.
Okay. I'm just taking into question some of the other development that's going on in that local area that could also be part of the view shed.
It could be, but our ordinance just talks to telecommunication towers,
Okay.
at least this particular part of it. So we've got to deal with, what we have in front of us. But to your point and to Larry's point, if the view shed significantly changes over a period of time, we could reach a different conclusion 5 years from now. But today we've got open space between the two and something that's proposed that's of significant size, twice the size of everything else right there, and without a petitioner saying, you know, they've exhausted the efforts to find another location that would actually work, and this is all they've got. And if we don't do this, then there's a cell desert. And that's not what we're facing tonight. There's no emergency. And as a result, nothing to justify overcoming what the town council has said is important. Any further discussion? And we've got two different docket numbers for this one.
We need two motions.
Yes, that's what Wayne would like.
All right. I move the docket 2018-05-DSV, Development Standard Variance for the property located 4400 South County Road 875 East to allow construction of a 125-foot tall wireless communication tower which exceeds the allowed height maximum within the urban special use zoning district SU1 be denied as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Thank you. Motion carries, and then we need to address the second one.
Move the docket number 2018-06-SE special exception for the property located 4400 South County Road 875 East to allow construction of a 125-foot tall wireless communication tower within the urban special use zoning district SU1 be denied as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Thank you. Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is docket number 2018-08-DSV B&D Homes First Edition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Mike Andrioli, 1393 West Oak Street here in Zionsville. I represent B&D Homes, and with me are two of the principals, Adam D'Angelo and Joyce Skidmore, who's helping with the particular development itself. Essentially, this is taking two lots along Mulberry, and the address is in your packet, and dividing those two lots into a three-lot minor lot subdivision. So that's essentially the initial plan that was proposed to the Plan Commission. And when we did that, the first plan that we had presented, and you recall this has been a metamorphosis. The first plan that we had presented had a three-lot subdivision and received a favorable staff report with the caveat that Mr. DeLong wanted to hear from the neighbors in terms of whether they had any difficulty with it. But one of the lots was in the very back. There were two lots alongside each other, and one of the lots was in the very back, and we were seeking a variance for that particular lot in itself, along with some other variances on that particular design. One of the neighbors raised a concern about the location of that house along the very back of that property. We had agreed to continue that, to talk with that neighbor, because he very well may have had a legitimate concern given the fact that one of the homes was going to be located at the very back of the property where they might see it or be a lot more proximate to that particular property. So we moved to continue it. We engaged them in a discussion, and after we talked with them, we decided that given the concerns that that property owner had with locating that lot in the back of the other two, that we'd have a more traditional type of three-lot development where you have a lot side by side by side. So you have a three-lot subdivision. All of them have road frontage along Mulberry, but given the depth of the lots and the narrowness of the lots, the RSF2 residential classification required a 80-foot width of lot and we have sought a variance for 67 and some change width of a lot, so some 13 feet difference. The other variance that was the same variance that we had sought previously was two of these houses have been on well. There's no practical aspect of trying to be able to locate these and tie them into the water system given the distances involved. Staff had and TAC had no particular problems with going ahead and allowing these particular properties to remain on well. We've had people out there looking at them and looking at the wells themselves and their locations and making sure that those are going to be appropriately accommodated with a new 3-lot subdivision. The goal, if approved, would be to remove all 3 houses and build new structures. And as part of your packet, we've provided general samples of work that B&D Homes has done in the community before with regard to the type of homes that we might seek to locate there. May not be exact, but they're pretty representative samples as to what they were proposing to locate there. As you look at these lots, they're fairly good-sized lots, all in the 20s or close to 25,000 square foot, between 22 and 25,000 square foot size, and that's what shows on the actual site plan. One of the advantages of this particular proposal is that we think it genuinely helps that property owner, because we will not have that house located at the very back of the lot, kind of around the other 2 lots. These will be 3 traditional lots that the houses will be located in proximity and in location from east to west with each other as they're constructed. So we think that's a very positive thing with regard to the new layout. As I mentioned, the original plan calls for, and the original ordinance calls for 80. We're looking at 67.30 or thereabouts in terms of width. One of the advantages of this particular layout versus the other layout, when we were going through the actual planning part of this and meeting with staff, we were advised that in the very back is where the sewer lines run, and that the town showed a 15-foot sanitary sewer easement on our property. That is non-existent. We have searched the records, we've done title searches. If there was an easement back there, it was never recorded. Notwithstanding all of that, this plat will actually provide the 15-foot on our side. There isn't a 15-foot that has been recorded on the properties to our west. So the total easement through there with sanitary will now be 30-foot with this development being approved, because we will dedicate the 15-foot on our side as permanent sanitary sewer easement as part of the plat. So whatever has happened in the past and why that wasn't recorded, it's all made well with this particular development plan and approval, if in fact you approve it. And the front, we've asked as part of the plat waiver, and we think we have staff support for that, to dedicate a 40-foot the right-of-way along Mulberry Street. This particular design will allow that to be done. We understood from previous correspondence that the remonstrators had hired Mr. Burris to represent them. Roger stopped in the office on Friday, and we had an opportunity to talk. I'm still not clear exactly what the opposition is from any neighbors with regard to the new site plan, or what they might want us to do to see what we can do to satisfy any concerns that they've had. I advised Roger that we're happy to enter into an agreement with them in terms of how far back the properties go to the west, so we don't put them at the very back of the properties, closer to their properties, but more in the middle to the front of the properties where the existing homes are now. That we'd make a commitment along that line, that we'd help with any drainage concerns. There may be some drainage concerns that some of the neighbors have with regard to drainage on their properties. We know that we're going to be required not to cause any impervious water to go off of our side as part of our development plan. We can do that by grading. We can do it by a dry retention. We've got a number of different plans that we've come up with in order to be able to accomplish that with regard to our plating with the Plan Commission. And I advise Roger we're happy to go ahead and share that with him, even work with the town to see if there are concerns in the area, is there a common solution that we could help be part of to take care of some of the neighbors' concerns with regard to drainage on their property and find a common solution, either by taking it to Mulberry or taking it some other way by picking up field tiles, which we know are there, and making sure that they've been metered and they've been scoped to make sure that they work. So I'm not exactly sure how to deal with any remonstrance, because I'm not exactly sure what their concerns are at this point, because it's never been artfully communicated to us so that we can deal with that. But notwithstanding all of that, in terms of the staff report, it's interesting. We had a favorable staff report to begin with, and because of the neighbors' concern, we went back to more traditional development. Now Wayne's staff report isn't quite as kind to us, and he can elaborate on some of the concerns that he has. There are other minor plats and little minor subdivisions in that particular area fairly close, and it's included in Wayne's staff report, that some have lots less than 50 feet. So we think with regard to the homes that we're going to put on there, the distance we have the back to not be close to the back, and make some commitments with regard to that. We think this is going to be a very, very fine project for Mulberry and fit in very nicely with the community and things that are fairly close by. I know that we've had some discussion, and Wayne's had some discussions with my clients, and just very briefly, and I'm not going to put words in his mouth or elaborate on that, in terms of the RSF 2 zoning classification and the fact there's nothing in between the RSF 2 and the RV. We had an RSF 3 at one point, and that was eliminated years ago, and I do recall that being done. Whether that is going to be within the Plan Commission's offices or the staff's offices to try to revisit that, given some of the plans that are moving through town in terms of some of the lots that are a little narrower, have less space, but still very major structures on them that have worked out very well in the village, but yet maybe translate some of those projects into other areas that aren't village residence district properties, but closer to the RSF2 properties, will be up to your good offices and staff's offices and the town council in terms of whether they want to revisit that. We just think for this particular project, this is a good outcome from the way we originally started, because we legitimately tried to work with the neighborhood and address the neighborhood concern with regard to where that one lot was being located, to have something now that's a more traditional lot, not close to the particular back property lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Andreoli. Any questions for the petitioner's representative? Thank you very much. Mr. Burris?
Good evening, Roger Burris, attorney with offices at 410 West Oak. And I represent several of the neighbors. Several of them are here tonight. Stephen Aldrich, and who lives right next door on Mulberry. And then I represent 4 of the property owners in the Pine Meadows subdivision.
Does Mr. Aldrich live to the north or south of the?
Just to the north, immediately to the north. And there may be other neighbors here that I'm not aware of, but I speak for those 5. And I'd like to first respond to a couple of Mr. Andreoli's comments. We did talk about this, and unfortunately, when I met with my clients, there really wasn't any common ground. I mean, there wasn't anything that we thought that could be done with their current plan that would make it acceptable to us. So that is why we have not.
Your clients object to, Mr. Burris?
I will certainly spell that out. Mr. Andrioli mentioned that there are 2 homes nearby with frontage of 50 foot or less. And I think we've found those, and they are close by, but they're like triangular shaped lots. So it's natural that those might have a narrower frontage and be much wider at the back. So we really don't think that's comparing apples to apples here.
So those are to the northeast?
I think
By Turkey Foot?
I think there's one on Turkey Foot like that, potentially, and then one directly to the north on Mulberry as you're going around the corner. Looks like one with a very narrow road frontage. It's kind of hard to tell. Yeah, I think there is one on Turkey Foot that's like that, and there were new homes that were kind of squeezed in some areas there. So getting to what really concerns us, as Mr. Andrioli stated, this is RSF2 zoning classification. The Zionsville ordinance says that this is a district to promote and maintain established neighborhoods in Zionsville. And while minimum lot width is 80 feet wide for lots of 15,000 square feet, actually, as you get to lots of 25,000 square feet and larger, the minimum width is 100 feet. So I think that indicates what the RSF2 is really about, is not, deep, narrow lots. It's about lots that will accommodate a reasonably sized house without it being, just like the corner of a house or the short side of a house. And my clients have no objection to new homes being built in this area, and I know Adam D'Angelo, and I know a bit about what he and his partners do, and they build nice homes. So we're not opposed to new homes being built in these lots, but we feel that if you look at the area, certainly in the area, most of the lots are 1/3 of an acre or larger, and they contain homes that are valued in the neighborhood of $300,000, and even now up to over $1 million. Because in the last few years, there's been some homes demolished and rebuilt on lots nearby, which command values, their assessed values are even over $1 million, or $800,000, $900,000. So the trend in the area is certainly not to have narrower, smaller lots. The trend is to rebuild homes into nicer homes and improve the value of the neighborhood. And actually, I think the Aldriches and the neighboring property owners just to the south, I think, have additions and remodeled their homes to increase the value of those homes.
Yeah, my sense, this is on one of my running routes, and so my sense is the Aldrich's house probably used to be like these 2 ranch houses, and it's been expanded upon meaningfully.
Right.
So I've seen that through time. So your client's concern is that the proposed variance would have a substantial negative impact on their property values?
Yeah, so if you look at the findings that the petitioner has the burden of carrying here tonight and must, submit evidence to prove before you can approve of these variances. And by the way, we're not really objecting to the water issue, whether there's another well. We're not concerned about that unless our wells go dry. But, that would be a bigger issue, I think, than just that variance. So we're just talking about the size of the lots is what we're concerned about. But if you look at the proposed findings, they're spelled out there, and then they're also in your staff report. But number 1 and number 2 are kind of similar in that, my clients believe that if you grant these variances, there is certainly a possibility that those will have a negative impact on their property values, because these will be homes that are inconsistent with any other homes in the neighborhood because they're on such narrow lots. If you think about a 67-foot wide lot that's 350 feet deep, certainly you can build a decent-sized home on those lots, and I think they probably would, and they'd be very nice. But they're going to be totally out of sync with practically all the other homes in the neighborhood. But I think the biggest problem is they're having to prove the hardship. You know, the ordinance requires, or state law requires, and the Zionsville ordinance requires that for you to approve this, you have to find that the petitioner has proved an unnecessary hardship. And, you know, that's something that we talk about in these meetings and that I'm sure you've heard discussed many times before. I hadn't researched it recently, so I did a little research, you know, kind of what lawyers do, and found that actually the leading case is 1953, Indiana Supreme Court, City of East Chicago versus Sinclair Refining Company, where they said that there's no single factor to determine what constitutes an unnecessary hardship, but all relevant factors, when taken together, must indicate that the special conditions are such that the property affected cannot reasonably be put to a conforming use. And it goes on to quote a New York case that said that the petitioner must show that the land in question cannot yield a reasonable return if used for the purpose allowed, in other words, as zoned. Secondly, that the plight of the owner is due to unique circumstances and not to general conditions. We haven't heard anything about unique circumstances here. But then number three, refers to the general conditions of the neighborhood, which takes me back to, you know, what is the hardship here? They can certainly build, you know, 2 new homes on those 2 lots and do a very nice job, but, you know, there's been no evidence of any hardship because they've given no reason why they can't just build 2 homes there. They apparently would just prefer to build 3 homes. So we feel that they've not met their burden of proof, and therefore the petition should be denied. The staff report, just a couple comments there, and I'll leave it open to others. But the staff report has a good analysis mentioning that while it might be appropriate in a situation like this to grant a variance for 1 lot, but to grant variances for 3 lots didn't seem right to staff, and I agree. And I think there is a typo in the staff report. Mr. DeLong mentioned on page 2, under minimum lot width, that with lot size between 25,000 square feet and 1 acre, they're required to provide a minimum of 80 feet. I think that's 100, I think. But as we discussed, these lots are under 25,000 square feet, so the minimum is 80. So there hasn't been any harm caused by that typo, but I think that's what it is. So again, my clients don't see that there's anything that the petitioner could do to satisfy their concerns with creating 3 narrow homes on narrow, deep lots that would not detract from the neighborhood. So we would request that you deny this petition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burris. Are there any questions for Mr. Burris? Hearing none, are there any other remonstrators here tonight? Please come up and state your name and address for the record.
For the record, my name is Stephen Aldrich. I live at 660 Mulberry Street, just to the north of the properties. We purchased our homes relying on the Zionsville RSF2 zoning to keep the open look and feel of the neighborhood and the area. That was a major factor to our purchase decision, was how open this space is. We do not feel granting lot width variances for 3 consecutive lots is appropriate. We feel it would affect our property in a substantially adverse manner. The 3 consecutive lots being so narrow would likely increase the density feel as you drive across Mulberry Street connecting Zionsville to the high school. And that would be a very undesirable manner. The present 2-lot design that exists today already allows for larger homes. Don't really see the need that there needs to be 3 lots there in order to build larger homes is what's listed in the findings of fact. One of the points I brought up in some of the conversations with the builder was that currently is 1.78 acres. If you divide that into 3 properties, it actually bumps you into the 100-foot width. I think part of the property that's lost here is contributed back to Mulberry Street, but I don't know where that lost property is and haven't received an answer from them about where that missing property is from the existing 2. So if you add up the 2 existing properties, it actually bumps you into even a bigger width discrepancy. And in regards to the existing properties, one of those existing narrow properties, it backs up actually into the Turkey Foot Golf Course, into our golf course, and it seems like it's a natural thing versus backing up into this open neighborhood that's like 13 backyards. Just isn't very appropriate to try to build into that open area. So we do appreciate that them working with us to move from what's an extremely undesirable to still just an undesirable, but it's still a very undesirable plan in terms of what we see from the neighborhood into our property values. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aldrich. Any questions for Mr. Aldrich? Hearing none, are there any other remonstrators who want to speak tonight? Seeing none, Mr. Andreoli.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Chairman, this kind of falls under the heading that no good deed goes unpunished. Mr. Aldrich was the individual that objected to our prior lot arrangement where we had the lot in the back and had favorable staff report with regard to that one variance. We changed this because of that particular objection that he had, not wanting that lot in the very back where he'd be looking at the sides of the lots when he's back on his lot and this, that, and the other. So, you know, I guess we could go back to that one where we had a favorable staff report if staff is being relied upon by the remonstrators and seek approval for that. But we really didn't think that's what the neighborhood wanted when you look at the overall aspects of these lots and where those homes might be towards the back of the lot. Didn't make a sensible arrangement to me when we saw it and we saw it laid out, and hearing Mr. Aldrich's concerns with regard to that. Now we've gone to an objection where he doesn't want us to minor plat those 3 lots. These homes, according to Mr. D'Angelo, are going to be somewhere between $450 and $650 in terms of the price of these homes. These homes are not going to devalue the property dollar amounts of the surrounding neighborhood. They're just simply not, given the quality of these homes and the size of these homes. And these are not really village lots. These are, 22,000 square foot lots for these lots. So these are good sized lots in terms of how they're laid out. And these homes could be artfully put on there as they are in the village, homes that are now priced in the $650 to $850 range that are put on lots that are much smaller than this. So these are normal transitions that I think happen with established older neighborhoods. And this area of Mulberry is, and it will eventually transition. And I hope Wayne would agree that this type of transition, in terms of how we're proposing it, is a good start to that particular transition, given the quality of these homes, the fact that we're going to provide for easement, we're going to provide for right-of-way for sidewalks in the front, which nobody else along that area has done, nor will they do until these areas transition at some point in time, which they eventually will, as most of the areas have done. So we think there's just so many positives with this. In terms of the proposal itself, that we would hope that you give it strong consideration. We even reached out to Roger and said, and maybe there's no room for compromise given their position tonight. We said, look, if there's some landscaping we can do along the sides, or across the back, or reforestation of that area. We'd be happy to come up with a landscape plan that you can take a look at to see if that would solve your issues with regard to the narrowness of the lots and the proximity of those houses to your lot lines, if we could do something from a landscape plan, we were all open to that. But it's just not a process that works well for us just to throw it against the wall and see if it sticks if we're not getting any feedback back. And that's the position that we're in. We certainly would suggest that you give us a positive vote on this tonight, or send us to the drawing board with the community and see if there's something else we can come up with. But at this point, we thought we were doing the right thing by coming up with this plan versus the original plan that had Wayne's stamp of approval on it. Thank you.
So, Mr. Andreoli, just real quickly, to a couple of Mr. Burris's points on the elements that you've got the burden of proof on. He talked about the adverse impact to the neighboring property values. You stated you don't think that's the case because of the quality of the construction.
Not only do I not think that's the case, given the quality of the homes and the price range of these homes, there's no empirical information or suggestion on the part of Mr. Burris or anybody else that this is going to negatively impact the values of the homes. If they want to talk about if it's going to impact how they view their neighborhood or those types of things, I've not heard any of that, but that's a different story, and I understand that if that would be the case. But in terms of the value, we just don't, you can make that statement, but there's no empirical information that suggests that that's remarkably true.
Okay, and then the second point he made was about undue hardship. So help us understand why you feel that your petition meets the burden of undue hardship.
In order to get 3 appropriate lots there, to not have the lot all the way, this is Mulberry, to not have one lot in the back. I should have brought my former site plan, but you may recall.
We remember it, right.
You remember. One lot in the back and then 2 lots up front. The appropriate hardship is that these are long, narrow lots. These lots are much deeper than they are.
So as, to paraphrase the argument that Mr. Burris made, if your client can get a reasonable economic return with the existing lots.
We can't.
You can't build
no,
on those?
The homes that are currently there are not, they're older homes. They're homes that probably should transition in one way or the other, either by trying to go in and rehab them, which that's not the business that he's in, and it doesn't look like that's going to be a particularly workable situation. That's why from the very beginning we've been clear that we really think those 2 older homes, one of which is not in as good a repair as the other, should essentially come down and be replaced with newer appropriate structures.
But why, and that's fine, why can't you do that with those 2 homes and replace them with 2 new homes?
Well, you can, but the economics of trying to acquire the property and then do it with those particular homes aren't going to work. You got to tear them down. You're actually paying not only for the lot, but you're paying for the properties, regardless of whether or not they're suitable to rehab or suitable to even use. You're paying for those because those structures are there. So that's built into the cost of the ground. So it's just not economically feasible to do that. If that's, if we're turned down here, obviously he's got a decision to make, and that may be what we ultimately have to do. But that certainly is not anything that we view to be economically feasible, and we really think that in the long run, the properties as we're laying them out are going to be much, much nicer properties and will be attractive properties the way that we're constructing them. If you look at the lots are very long, and regardless of the 2 properties that we're buying or otherwise, that's the dimension of the lot that we're buying. So hope that's a sufficient answer, but that's our answer.
Thank you, Mr. Andreoli. Mr. Burris, do you want to make any further comments?
Yeah, my only comment is that I still don't accept the economic hardship. I mean, there are cases that talk about that under kind of a different wording of the law, but to say that they had to buy, that the economics don't work, I mean, I don't think there's been enough evidence of that, because they're saying that they had to buy the houses with the lots, and that means that to tear them down, then they can't make money. But there's builders making money doing this right, like 4 and 5 lots away from these. So I just don't think that that's a reasonable argument, and I don't think it meets the standard because it's a self-imposed hardship. They're saying they already bought the lots, so now they need to have 3 lots. Well, if they weren't sure they could have 3 lots, they shouldn't have bought the 2. They should have thought about that before. So it's a self-imposed hardship, which is not an unnecessary hardship. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burris. May we have the staff report, please?
Thank you. Finding it somewhat relevant to focus on the previous staff report. Certainly staff in thinking about this project and reviewing it internally, the previous layout was a format that staff found in pockets along both Bloor and Mulberry, and certainly that type of change to the fabric of the roadway was something that staff was supportive of. Certainly what's in front of you this evening, while it's certainly different than what was presented, and certainly different comments from the neighbors, the staff is reviewing it based upon the fabric that's being changed, would be changed as proposed, and certainly 3 inline 67-foot wide lots is not the fabric that you find along this section of roadway, certainly in maybe in smaller pockets, and certainly on Turkey Foot is a subdivision that's 4 or 5 lots, and it's zoned a different classification provided by a different source. Certainly there could be a day where there is a zoning classification that supports something in between RV and RSF2. Certainly that would take research and involvement of your town council and your plan commission to make that happen. But that's not what is here, we're here to discuss tonight, and certainly not necessarily a spot zoning to support that type of development. Again, staff has indicated is not supportive of the petition as it's currently presented, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Wayne. Any questions for staff?
Rena, I don't know if you can point out on this, the overhead view we have the 2 houses that you do mention in your report that are less than 50-foot wide. And I think Mr. Burris may have mentioned that they are odd-shaped lots, but I drove that again today, and I found it difficult to pinpoint exactly which 2 houses that you were referring to.
Well, the 2 50-foot wide lots, best my recollection, are the 2 triangular lots that have been referred to earlier this evening. One is at the intersection of Turkey Foot and Mulberry.
Okay.
On the south side of Turkey Foot. On the north side, there's another triangular shaped lot that has a small amount of frontage on Mulberry. Uniquely, that parcel on the north side of Turkey Foot, or on the west side of Turkey Foot rather, started its life as a rectangular parcel, and at some point in time was split into 2 pie-shaped parcels to facilitate the new build, which is on the northern, or the northern half of that particular parcel. The subdivision I'm referring to on northern part of Turkey Foot is just off the aerial photograph, but you can start to see the lots take shape where the language says 20 USMT. That's at the beginning of those lots there.
Okay, those are homes that are about 20 years old or so?
I would say that's about, sounds about right. They back up against the...
I know which ones they are then. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? So we have a bit of a challenge, right? I mean, our community is highly desirable, which is great. So there's demand for people to come in. There's demand to do tear downs, rebuild, grow. And we have to figure out a way that balances that demand with the rights of our neighboring property owners and the look and feel of our community. The challenge of what I see what the petitioners are proposing here is introducing an element that's inconsistent with the rest of this area. If it were inside the village proper, it would likely very much make sense. But having that level of kind of denser buildings, even if they're attractive and expensive and nice, it just is going to look weird. Similar to Starkey, I talked to you about this.
Starkey and
It's
Sixth.
Sixth and
Starkey
Starkey and
Sixth. I mean, the
Sycamore.
idea of packing those three things in there,
And in that situation over there, they actually took an existing house and sold 5 feet of land on one side of it to make the adjoining property wide enough that it did not need a variance to then create the 2 additional lots. So I voted against that as well. And in the end, people keep coming back looking at it and saying, no. The issue you have is that current home standards have gotten substantially larger than the standards that were in effect when most of these homes were built. And while on a regular basis we allow lots to be subdivided that then create lots that are similar to the other lots around it, like in the village, we'll take double lots and allow them to be divided up or back into how they were originally even platted. This is a situation where taking 2 lots and creating 3 is introducing a frontage that is not in keeping with the 2 existing or 2 remaining parcels north and south of it. While there's these 4 lots that are all of one size and they're substantially larger maybe than everything around it, that's just the nature of Zionsville. You will find these little pockets. But to allow these to be turned into more or less, flag type lots that we regularly do not allow, it's just not particularly beneficial. Basically, it's one thing to create lots where the newly created lots actually blend with the existing. It's a substantially different issue when you introduce an entire different texture and layout to an area.
and the adverse impact that would have, and the unnecessary hardship, undue hardship piece, I think, I don't see how they meet that burden.
It's all self-imposed.
And I'm not, maybe I should just stop talking, but at 67 feet.
You just started.
I know. I'm not sure where I'm going yet, but at 67 feet, if there was a larger, or a lot that met our requirements, and then a smaller, narrower lot, and then a lot that met our requirements, I don't think you would notice that lot. But when you stack 3 of them next to each other, I think it will be not very aesthetically pleasing. I think it will become noticeable.
So adverse impact. Okay. Thank you. So I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion. I move that docket number 2018-08-DSV design standard variance in order to replat for the construction of single-family homes which are not connected to a public water and deviate from the minimum road frontage, lot 3 only. All is illustrated on the site plan attached to this report, and the urban residential single-family zoning district RSF2 be denied as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is new business. That took a while to get there. Docket number 2018-17-DSV Village sign. Please state your name and address for the record and give us a brief overview of what you're interested in tonight.
I'm going to pass some photographs. My name is Stan Evans. I'm with RSE Realty with offices at 22 East Washington Street in Indianapolis. I'm a part owner at Boone Village Shopping Center and of the petitioner, which is Ford Road Outlot LLC. We are proposing to install a essentially duplicate sign of what is on the Oak Street frontage for Boone Village. It's 15 feet tall by about 14 feet wide, has multiple tenant identification panels on it. When we originally came in with our development plan for Ford Road Outlot, we had a smaller sign. We also didn't have a grocer that was operating at the time. And when Kroger found out that we had a sign going out there, they asked if they could be accommodated on the sign. So that's we're requesting that the sign be allowed to be placed at a little over 5 feet off of the right-of-way. If you look at the site plan that's in your packet, it is just of the outlot. It shows you where that is in relation to the sidewalk. So I passed out these photographs that'll help you visualize where that is. If you are looking at the site plan, just outside of the outlot parcel, there's a little looks like almost like a hurricane marker. That's actually the power pole that is in the first photograph that you see. So the sign would sit back some probably 8 feet further to the east from that pole, and separated fairly significantly from the traffic lane. One of our concerns is that with our relatively mature trees, if you our line of sight to a sign, if put further back, would become somewhat untenable. It's not so bad from this front view, but when you look from the second view, yeah, even bring it further front, it'll be largely obstructed by the existing vegetation.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Mr. Evans. Can I ask you a couple questions?
Sure.
So your visual notes that it's going to be illuminated. How is it going to be illuminated?
It's an internally illuminated sign. It's the same sign as we have over on Oak Street.
What are the hours that it'll be illuminated?
I think ordinance keeps us from being lit because of our proximity to residential on that side to being 11 o'clock, so it'll be put on a timer.
Okay, and so when would it turn on in the morning?
Well, it won't turn on in the morning. It will turn on at
Oh,
dark.
it does.
At dark.
Okay, so it's only evening hours, and it would
Correct.
End at 11. Okay.
Correct.
Is your other sign, and so this has the same look and feel as the other sign?
It's the
Virtually
same
identical.
company making it, same layout, same size panels, everything.
Okay, that sounds good. Any questions for the petitioner? Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Thank you.
Any remonstrators here tonight? Hearing none, may we have the staff report, please?
Thank you. Staff is supportive of the petition as filed. We note in the staff report the setback requests versus what the resulting setback actually functions from the travel lane, and the requested setback actually results in a 30-foot setback from the travel lane, and certainly that's a very similar setback that is enjoyed on Oak Street, so the fit, feel, and finish of this sign versus the existing sign are nearly identical, and certainly that's an additional attribute that staff sees. Again, staff is supportive of the petition as filed, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Wayne. Any questions for staff? I agree, it's nice to have the same look and feel. It makes it look more polished, so you guys did a nice job with that. We've certainly reviewed your findings of fact on each one of the various elements you need to meet, so we're familiar with that. Any further questions or comments amongst the board? If none, I would entertain a motion.
Sure, I'll make a motion. I move that docket number 2018-17-DSV, Development Standards Variance Petition in the B2 Urban General Business for the property located at 51 North Ford Road be approved based on the staff report and the proposed findings as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Evans. The next matter is docket number 2018-18-DSV. Hess Batchelor.
Ms. Batchelor is not here in the audience. She is aware that there was a glitch in her public notice. I believe it was.
Not by the post office again. Don't say it.
I will not say it. No, I'm not aware of any fault of any government agency specific to this request. But she did not, I believe the notice was not met, and so this matter would need to be continued with notice to a future meeting.
Okay, so you're saying we need to take action to continue it, and we should require that she renotice both publication and by registered mail?
Since she is not here to make any specificities, I would suggest personal and published, yes.
Thank you, Wayne. Does that work for you?
Yeah.
Darren?
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions or comments on the proposed continuance?
We confirmed that the date is July 10th.
We did. Okay. Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
I will make a motion that petition number 2018-18-DSV be continued to the July 10th meeting.
Would you be amenable to amending that to note that the petitioner needs to do the public and private notices?
I am amenable to that.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. The next item on our agenda is docket 2018-19-DSV, Wildwood Designs. If the petitioner would please come to the podium and state your name and address for the record.
I'm David Shanebaum. I reside at 10595 Wildwood Drive. I'm principal in Wildwood Designs. We're in partnership with Prize Properties regarding the development of this property in question. If you'll grant me just a little bit of leeway, I'm very nervous. Probably appearing in pro per was a mistake.
No, nonsense.
see.
We could not be an easier crowd to talk to.
Well, it's not you I'm worried about.
Oh, good, good, good. Is it Larry?
I want to thank Roger Burris for arming the demonstrators.
Yeah, don't worry about it. And so give us a brief overview of what you're interested in tonight.
We purchased the property in question with intent to subdivide and develop it. There's been an established peer group of properties to the north on 975. They're in large. They are 2.5 acre lots extending through the Schaefer minor plat that was just approved. In keeping with that, we intend to split into roughly 2.5 acre lots on this property. And establish home sites that would be in keeping with the peer group there as far as size, property value, and level of finish, that sort of thing.
What's your sense of the size of a home you'd construct?
Well, there's two different approaches. One is actually like an empty nester type home that is near and dear to my investor because he may retain one of the properties, and that would be approximately a 3,500 square foot home, ranch with a small loft and basement. The other would be to have a 3,500 square foot main floor with a partial second story overlay and a full basement. So that would be a more substantial home. But I'm the operating partner in this, and I've done well so far by staying within Mr. Pitt's budget and his guidelines as far as return. So it's entirely possible that we may split off and actually sell the lots once they're platted. There's quite a few people here that I expect are going to be remonstrating, and they would like to have say in that. So that's a lot of the discussion.
Okay, and we'll get to that in a second. Did you have the opportunity to review the staff report?
Yes, I did. And the staff report's actually quite favorable. And I've had contact with Mr. DeLong throughout this. This is my first time doing this sort of thing, and so I actually
now know how easy it is.
Yeah. Well, actually, I've been a contractor in good standing for a while. I have a fairly solid reputation, and the building and planning department, most of their staff know me very well, and they know my work. We actually did another project approximately 150 yards away from this subject property. It was at 8610 East 250 South, and the hayfield that was the Schaefer minor plat was originally ours, and we sold it to him, or we sold it to another party that sold it to him.
So the staff report has 3 proposed conditions about a maintenance plan being established, a turnaround being incorporated, and the overall design of the ingress-egress easement meeting the minimum standards of the Zionsville Fire Department.
Yeah, and I did meet with Josh Frost, and he actually outlined the standards for it. He presented me with actually written copy of that, and we're totally fine with actually meeting those requirements.
So those essentially the 3 conditions that staff has proposed. You're willing to.
Yeah, we have no problem meeting those. In fact, actually, the other there's other issues that would speak to the remonstrators' concerns. They are concerned that we are going to drive down their property values.
Right, and so that was going to be the next thing I wanted to talk to you about. So we got an email from Mr. Vosper.
And he's present.
And he raised some concerns, and in particular, he wanted commitments about the minimum home size, the private drive configuration, the architectural compatibility standards, landscape buffers, and building setbacks. So I think he's asking for a greater level of certainty.
Yeah, actually, and so we've actually met with Mr. Vosper. We've made ourselves, both myself and Greg have made ourselves totally available to him. We were emailing and texting back and forth all the way up until 4 o'clock today. I think that we'll be able to work something out. We were, so if you'll, I guess a little more history. I was under the impression this is a little more informal process, and we didn't plan to engage council until presenting for planning. So with the remarks and the input from the remonstrators, or I hope I'm not mispronouncing that, but with input from the adjoining parties, we're glad to put together a set of covenants and deed restrictions that would support the size, structure, speak to his privacy concerns, and also support the valuations. Mr. Burris's argument was very persuasive, stating that this is all self-inflicted and that economic thing doesn't work. But at the same point, it does speak to the fact that trying to build at this level, it's not really reasonable to expect that somebody would pay $250,000 or $300,000 for an acre, $300,000 for a lot, and then build a tiny house. So.
Right. No, and that makes sense. And I think actually we hear Mr. Vosper saying he wants more clarity, he wants more certainty, and we hear you saying you're happy to engage with him in that discussion.
We have. The problem was we didn't receive we didn't receive any notice of his objections or his concerns until, well, I was made aware of him a week ago, and then he presented his requests, his asks, to us. I believe it was yesterday, around 5 or 6 o'clock.
You haven't really had enough time to work.
Yeah, and I think we can. I think we can work it all out. Honestly, I guess I'm a little naive because I felt that we could work this all out and then present it for a plan. But if we need to actually come to this with a fully fleshed out agreement, we can do that. I would entertain a continuance, but because there's still another step in the process, and he'll have an opportunity to remonstrate at that point, then I'd be glad to present a fully developed package at that point too.
This is probably the most appropriate time for him to be able to remonstrate, and we always encourage petitioners to try to work with the neighbors to address any concerns.
And actually, Wayne said that to me very clearly.
So what I would propose, if you'd be amenable to this, is to take you up on the continuance, give you 30 days until our meeting on July 10th, so a little bit more than 30 days, to work with Mr. Vosper and any of the other neighboring property owners to try to address their concerns in a way that works for you too.
Yes, sir. I do want to put it in. I do want it in the record, though, that our contact with Mr. Vosper so far, there's been a couple of points that seem to be sticking points in the negotiation where he's set up an unbuildable or unfulfillable request. Like one of his concerns in another adjoining neighbor is. They've been working together to try to hash through this. These are people that are most directly affected by our build. one of their concerns is about our auxiliary buildings or outbuildings if somebody were to build another house with a barn or a detached garage. And we've got roughly 300 by 300 lots, or 360 by 340 foot lots. And they're stipulating 150-foot minimum from any adjoining property. And that would mean that you can't actually place an auxiliary building on the site. So I'm concerned about the negotiation in good faith. If we
Whether
do
they're
indeed,
being reasonable or not. I will tell you, in the past, we've had parties who've failed to be reasonable and have remonstrated, and there could have been something that could have accommodated them, and we granted the petition because the remonstrator was unreasonable. So they don't have the ability to hold you hostage unreasonably. It's
So
just,
in
can
that-
you guys work together in good faith to come up with something that makes sense? And I was saddened that you're gonna destroy the purple barn, but I guess the Barney barn, but we'll accept that.
We always
But
name our
we would
properties.
encourage you guys to have an opportunity to work together. They can't hold you hostage. You don't have to get their permission. It's gonna facilitate your approval if you guys can all reach agreement. If they're unreasonable, you know, there's precedent for that not going well for them.
well, I have confidence we'll be able to work it out. Honestly, I thought for sure showing up in town, everybody would be like, hey, Dave's gonna build another house. And I was maybe a bit wrong. So we'll continue to work with them, and we will put together something that addresses his needs and his concerns too, I'm sure.
That sounds great. Would anybody, Mr. Vosper, are you here tonight? Would you care to speak? Yes. Okay. Please state your name and address for the record.
Rod Vosper. My wife and I live at 2750. We're adjacent to the south. I'm here representing the Koches, who live on the north side of the property. I think together we're probably 50% or so of the abutting property. And I want to be on the record that we really would like to see this be executed well. And we're not here just to roll logs out in front of the project and delay it. But we do have some things that are very legitimate concerns for the value of the property and, you know, maintaining our reasonable view corridors and some other issues. I thought we made pretty good progress yesterday, so I'm confident and hopeful that we can get through this in 30 days. But there are some pretty, you know, some pretty large issues out there that we aren't comfortable with the response at this point in time to what we had suggested.
No, I understand. You've raised some legitimate concerns in your letter that we've reviewed. And not only do you guys need to reach agreement in principle on those, but you have to also be able to document them. So we want to provide you adequate time to make that effort, and appreciate you being reasonable. And are optimistic that you guys will be able to come up with something that makes sense.
Very good.
Any questions for Mr. Vosper? Is anybody else here tonight who wants to speak on this petition?
Good evening. My name is John Tynan, and I live at 2705 South, 875 East. Our property is directly across from this proposed development. I have a few questions.
Directly across from the east?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so
They're
you
on the
live,
west side of the street, we are on the east side.
and are you immediately across from Mr. Vosper?
No, I am not immediately across from Vosper's.
So are you the larger parcel then?
Can I step over there?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, and then you need to come back. Okay, that's you guys. And your house is,
Back off the road, maybe 1,500 feet.
okay.
I have a few issues. Are we aware that there are going to be 3 homes that have this, I think, 355 feet of road frontage. Is that within the standards? That's for you to determine.
Right, yeah, so, that's part of their variance request and part of what staff addressed. They would essentially be making for what's all practical purposes, a public road back into the property that then would serve the 3 parcels.
Well, that becomes a public road.
Well, it wouldn't be, it would be for practical, it's private, but for practical purposes. So it wouldn't be kind of flag lots per se. It would be a road that would allow for fire access that would be adequate.
The real issue I and my neighbors have is the drainage. There is a 8-inch line to the west of the property going from 250 to the south to dump into the creek. It is my understanding that at some point in time, this 8-inch drainage line was clogged, and one of the 4 homes to the north of this property was clogged up, and Boone and the highway department, or maybe not the highway department, somebody within the Boone County Department allowed them to have a temporary drainage to go into the ditch. My objection is I have all the property across from this ditch that is getting more and more water going through it. That
The ditch is on the east side of this property?
ditch,
Your
the ditch
property
goes
is to the
along.
east.
The ditch goes along the west side of 875.
Okay.
From 250 to the south, all of those homes dump down to the south, and then as the road goes higher in elevation, at one point, there's a culvert underneath the ground, underneath the road, that
It
dumps
diverts
onto
it all
my
to your
property.
side.
That
Okay.
is correct.
Yeah, have you engaged with the petitioner a little bit on drainage?
We're going.
And he's got a,
He has the floor right now, but we've
Are you-
actually addressed that tile already, so I can.
and we can't pick it up without you talking to the mic. So what I would suggest is, Mr. Tynan, during the 30-day continuance period, you guys have an opportunity to connect on your completely legitimate drainage concern.
I have one more comment.
Okay.
It was interesting. Earlier, I forget the other petition you were discussing, the 3 little lots in town, and you were talking about how all of this looks for the surrounding neighborhood. Well, I have a question that this is basically a rectangular lot, and the homes, I presume, are going to be front to back. How does...
No, so have you seen the proposed site plan?
No.
Okay, so I would encourage you to look at it. It essentially, they chop it up into, if it's a square, proposed 3 squares, which isn't a flag lot, and we don't like flag lots, and so that's good. During the 30-day period, I would encourage you to connect with the petitioner, spend some time, see if you can get comfortable, talk to them about landscaping if you've got any concerns about looking at it, work through the drainage question if you can, hopefully. And then we'll have an opportunity to talk about it in greater detail next month. Sure. Thank you, Mr. Tynan.
Actually, I really want to enter into the record that we were aware of the drainage issues affecting the other lots. We were told that there was a historical issue with a particular parcel that was involved in the easement and access to that tile. I immediately engaged that landowner upon our acquisition of the property. We gained access, and we were able to scope that line with a camera, determine that there was a significant blockage of tree roots. We repaired the problem, and then we also scoped the camera. We scoped that line going north, extending through my property. And we determined that to the greatest extent that we could, we determined that the drain was actually now in good shape and operating just fine. I initially withdrew from that activity because of other rather acrimonious contact with one of the other landowners, and I said, I don't have to do this, so I'm going to not put myself at risk. I was approached by Kent Schaefer, who's one of the other stakeholders, and I was on their behalf. I coordinated. I brought in my professionals. I gave of my time, and we expended our capital to remedy that problem. So this is a very serious concern, and I want you to know that's our goal is to do something really good here. Generally, we're good for the landscape. We're good for the neighborhood because I want to build responsibly, and I do everything I can to be a good neighbor. So.
Okay, well, great, and we certainly appreciate that, Mr. Schonenbaum. Any further questions for the petitioner? Hearing none, I would encourage you to spend that, again, 30 days, connect with these guys, do the best you can to get on the same page. Okay, thank you. Wayne, any comments or questions before we address the continuance?
No, staff has nothing additional to offer at this time.
Thank you, Wayne. So this would be a proposed continuance without an obligation to notice again because the notice was effective. Any discussion? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
I'll move that docket 2018-19-DSV, design standard variance in order to provide for the construction of a single-family home for 2 lots, which one deviates from the minimum road frontages illustrated in the illustration of proposed division attached to this report, be continued until the July 10th meeting without need for notice.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is docket number 2018-20-DSV, Archview Properties. Guys, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
I'm going to hash it out right here.
Why, that's great. This looks very futuristic, Mr. Oakes.
Don't be fooled.
Wow, look at that.
Spaceship.
It does slightly resemble a spaceship. I get it.
Okay, Mr. Oakes, please state your name and address for the record and give us a brief overview of what you're interested in tonight.
I will do so. Thank you. President, members of the board, for the record, Tim Oakes, representing Cityscape Residential Development, which is a locally based regional developer of market rate apartments. Of course, we are talking about the Walmart site, which is about 14.5 acres, currently zoned B2. We have a pending rezone to the RMF2 district, along with a development plan pending before the Plan Commission. As part of the processing and development of that work, and particularly the development plan, it's come to our attention the need to obtain 4 development standard variances, which are before you tonight. 2 can be categorized as really necessary because this property is directly on the county line. It's part of our larger parcel that extends into Hamilton County. The other 2, just quite frankly, make very, very good design sense. So with that, I'll discuss briefly each of the 4 requested variances. First is the height requirement. In the district, 35 feet is the height. We are asking for 48. We will be doing 3-story apartment buildings. We will not be exceeding the number of stories. The height is to make the buildings much more interesting, more diverse, have a different roof line,
something that is aesthetically pleasing and attractive up to the standards, quite frankly, of Zionsville. The alternative being a flat roof that has no breaks because you can't do much with 35 feet in a 3-story building. The second request is for a variance from the requirement for 150 foot of frontage. This overall tract, if it were all in the county, we'd have no problem. It has well over 150 feet of frontage on Michigan Road. That's not the case here, so we do have to request this variance. We will have actually be a boulevard that will extend from Michigan Road all the way back to the apartment complex, and we've actually had a meeting with Josh, the fire marshal, and also we've been through TAC once already, so access, at least through TAC, has not presented any issues, and the variance is necessary again because this is on the county boundary. The third requirement, which is where I get to the spaceship design, is the recreational open space. The ordinance requires that recreational open space be 7% of the total lot area. That doesn't sound like much. Here, though, that would require 44,000 square feet. The issue is that by ordinance, that recreational open space cannot include any yards. That includes required interior yards, which is where this comes in. This project will have 3 buildings, and the 3 buildings are around this gray area that looks like a spaceship. The gray area is what we consider, without reference to the ordinance, as open space. It is designed to be an amenity. In the center will be a pool and other amenities around it. We'll be able to fit that in there. It's designed integrated amenity space. The area that's gray that has the crosshatch on it, though, is the interior yard, and that doesn't count. But in order to properly integrate the open space, to provide security, to provide privacy, to provide good design for what will be the residents of the apartments, we're seeking a variance. The overall square footage of gray area exceeds by a fair margin the required recreational open space. It's just by definition that we can't count it all. Finally, we have an accessory use issue. We have a trash container in excess of 36 cubic feet that can't be in front of the front building line. And you'll see it in the staff packet, but the proposed trash container is located on the very southeast corner of the portion of the property that is in Boone County. We want to put it there because it's away from the actual apartments where residents will live, but it will be behind the retail/restaurant type uses that we anticipate on the Hamilton County side of this project. And those uses, by the way, are permitted under the current zoning, under the Carmel zoning ordinance. So with that, we've reviewed the staff report. We are in agreement with it. We thank staff, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that the board might have.
Thank you, Mr. Oakes. So to be clear, the petitioner owns this property and the property to the east.
We have it under contract. We don't yet own it, but we would be buying all of it.
You control the entire.
Yes, that is correct.
So there'll be an easement or dedicated roadway from Michigan Road as depicted on the.
Yes, it will either be a perpetual easement or dedicated right-of-way, one or the other.
One or the other. Okay, great. Any other questions for the petitioner?
I just want another explanation of the gray and the gray hashed area. The hashed area represents.
Your ordinance contains yard requirements that are not just perimeter yards, the standard front yard, side yard, rear yards. Your ordinance in the RMF2 district contains requirements for internal yards that are measured from buildings. So those internal yards, because they are defined as yards, cannot be included in the definition of recreational open space.
So the hatch part doesn't qualify under.
The hatch part technically does not qualify.
But it's
We've
not-
designed it to be recreational open space, and we want to count it that as the variance request.
So it's not like it's fenced or it's somehow reserved for the apartments that adjoin it. It's more or less just it's almost like a setback line off the face of the buildings.
Correct.
All this is open space.
Yes,
And that-
all the gray area, including the crosshatch area, is open space. And it exceeds the 44,000 square feet that is the standard that would be required for this site for recreational open space.
If I was looking at the plan correctly, there's some indoor garages with some of the units. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
And are those dedicated to certain units, or are they just sort of common spaces?
They'll be dedicated to units. Both.
Real quick, what's the gross value for this project?
Don't know. We could probably give you a range, but we have 219 units, so probably, even if you go at, 100,000 a room, that's probably a little high, but certainly you're looking at over 8 million in terms of all-in costs.
Vic, this is probably more directed for staff, but I remember when we had a subdivision come before us, and I thought that we had a 45-foot height restriction because of the fire department with their hoses and ladders. Do you recall that?
There was a specific conversation related to the height of their ladders to window sill ledges. Certainly the fire department, will review the construction standards during the plan commission process, which is actually happening concurrently. The reason that the staff mentions in this report, there are, on more than one occasion, the town has approved apartment buildings that are 45, 46 feet, 48 feet in height, is to document that the town has been supportive, the fire department has seen these types of projects previously and had signed off on them. Most recently, the Domain. The Domain is right next door, and I believe their project was approved at 48 feet.
And the fire department signed off on that?
Correct.
Thank you. Good question.
Josh has seen these plans, and he's okay with them for that very reason, which is the additional height is not to provide additional living space. It's to provide variety and change and
Architectural
to the roof line.
interest?
Yes, thank you.
Any further questions for the petitioner? Are there any remonstrators here tonight? Seeing none, may we have the staff report, please?
Thank you. The staff is supportive of the petition as filed. The staff report addresses the items that have been requested: height, the frontage, the recreation open space, and the accessory use. Uniquely, this parcel has frontage on a sub-street to the rear of the site, but will ultimately derive its only access from Michigan Road, being integrated with a future project that is located in the city of Carmel. But certainly that would not preclude staff from being supportive of the project. Certainly there is no interest by any governmental agency in extending Andre Drive, and certainly would encourage the ownership to vacate Andre from this particular parcel and from the Snyder parcel to the west in order to just clean up that history. Again, staff is supportive of the petition as filed, and certainly also recognizing that the Plan Commission as well will be reviewing the development plan here in the near future, and related rezoning request, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Wayne. Any questions for staff?
Just one more question, and that's when we're talking about vacating the access for the other drives. Is there a need for like an emergency, something that wouldn't necessarily be used, but just to have an emergency entrance?
We specifically we called a meeting with Joshua Frost prior to TAC with that question in mind. That was the only topic that we had. And that is also the reason I mentioned that boulevard entrance that's coming in from Michigan Road. When I say boulevard, it will have a median that runs the entire length until you get to its intersection. It'll be a T intersection with the apartment, so you can go left or right and go around the loop. The thought process is there that if there's an accident that would block one side, you'd be able to go down the other. So we will have that boulevard entrance to address that, and Josh is comfortable with that.
Okay, thank you.
And also on a secondary note, Red Road, which is a road that's directly to the north, almost wholly located in Hamilton County, will interface with the proposed east-west street. And certainly I would suspect as this goes through the City of Carmel Development Plan review process, they will look for that extension of Red Road to ultimately connect to Nottingham Way and land that's owned by Pearson Ford.
Thank you, Wayne. Any further questions for staff? Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
I will make a motion. I move that docket number 2018-20-DSV Design Standards Variance in order to provide for a 218-unit apartment development which, 1, deviates from the required 35-foot height allowance to a height of 48 feet, 2, deviates from the required 150-foot road frontage to 0 feet road frontage, 3, deviates from the required open space percentage, and 4, deviates from the required location of accessory uses as illustrated in the petitioner's submittal attached to this report in the urban residential multifamily RMF2 zoning district for the property located at 779 Lennox Court be approved as filed based upon the findings of fact.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much, Mr. Oaks.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda tonight is docket number 2018-21-DSV, Baker's Corner LLC. Please approach the podium and state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Jerry Schaefer. I am representing Baker's Corner LLC. I live at 6695 Beacon Place here in Zionsville.
Great. Please provide us a brief overview of what it is you're interested in tonight.
Yes, it's late, and I appreciate you taking the time to hear me out this evening.
Well, we appreciate your staying there.
We purchased a home at 140 North Maple with the intent of either adding to it or remodeling it. An existing home is a one-bedroom home, kind of an awkward floor plan. There's an existing two-car garage behind the home that is actually right on the alleyway and almost on the adjacent property owner's property. The home is in need of some significant repairs. I've done a thorough investigation. I'm a home builder in the area. My wife and I have lived here for 26 years. And Wayne and some of the folks here are familiar with me and here in town. I've done several other homes here in the village, some renovations. And so our intent is to modify this home to make it more, I guess, up with standards of today's homes that you mentioned earlier. It seems like some of the home sizes tend to be a little bit larger, and to get room sizes and a first floor master and things like that. We're empty nesters, so those kind of things, when you put all that together and try to put a floor plan together, you come up with something in this neighborhood. And so that is what I'm proposing. We'd like to build something that would require a little more square footage, and would like to be able to do that.
Okay, great. Any questions for the petitioner?
So is it a one or two-story house?
It's a two-story home. There should be in your packets a home up the street that I did on 280 North Maple. It's a blue and white home. It would be similar in overall style, not necessarily, obviously it would change the elevation to not make it look so close to that one, but it would be similar in style and look to that home.
Any other questions for the petitioner?
And then Wayne, on the lot coverage, it is just all the house structure that's sort of generating there's really not much of a driveway, is it?
No, it's about 20 foot that would be coming in from the back alleyway that would enter the garage. I really hadn't included that in my square footage request. I didn't know if that was something that needed to be addressed.
The driveway does not count against open space.
Yeah, but is the current driveway then off of the front, or does it come off an alley?
It's currently off of Maple Street, yes.
Yeah, because it's the garage is tucked right back in there, the current garage.
So technically, currently, even though the house is smaller and the garage is smaller, there's a lot more paved surface. So you'll be peeling all that out?
Sir.
And then accessing the garage off the alley in the back?
Correct.
So depending on how you run the math, you could actually be having a net decrease in impervious surface. It's just the way we do our math that shows as an increase.
So I wish I'd realized that before this meeting. I might have had, no, I'm just kidding. No, yes, that would be accurate.
Well, it's because of the potential impact on drainage.
That's right.
All about the drainage.
Yeah, no, he's got our drainage flank covered.
Drainage flank covered.
Any further
Who's
questions?
ever going to sneak up through the swamp on you when
Nobody.
you get me?
Nobody.
Never.
No, not while you're on watch.
I'm going to drain the swamp. That's
We appreciate that.
good.
Okay, any remonstrators here tonight? Seeing none, may we have the staff report, please?
Literally.
Thank you. Staff is supportive of the petition as filed for all the reasons that have been indicated this evening, and certainly what Mr. Jones focused on specific to lot coverage and drainage and the positive impacts this project will have. Of note, this project, or I'm sorry, this home site, it was actually captured in the 1986 interim study historical inventory of properties, and the home that's here was considered contributing, so we certainly appreciate Mr. Schaefer's efforts here to breathe additional life into this historic property. But again, staff is supportive of the petition as filed, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So we identified this home as being historically significant?
The State Historic Preservation Office identified that, but you have no local regulations specific to any of that charge, unlike cell towers.
Which we're otherwise familiar with.
Otherwise, yes. So,
because Mr. Schaefer, you're drastically changing this house.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There's some characteristics of it that we are going to maintain, or try to maintain, as we did with the other home, but yes, it will be a drastic look.
What characteristics are you going to try to maintain?
There's some things about the front of the home and definitely some things interior of the home that we would reuse. There's some nice trim moldings and stained glass and some other things that are in the home that are kind of there's a story. You know, the house had a story, and I would like to kind of maintain some of the story with the house. So.
Okay. Any further questions or comments?
Are there any other approvals needed when you alter a historic structure?
with Zionsville not having a historic preservation ordinance, it's merely an organic conversation relying on home builders and landowners to be the stewards of the property.
And he's not, just throwing up a little vinyl something or another. He's thoughtfully including some of the elements. That is a bit of a gap in our community. If we really care about historic preservation, we need to get on that. Okay, any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
I move that docket number 2018-21-DSV Design Standards Variance, and in order to provide for the remodel addition of an existing single-family home, which one exceeds the required lot coverage of 35% to 42.7%, 2 deviates from the required side yard setback, and 3 deviates from the required front yard setback, as illustrated on the site plan attached to our reports, in the RV Residential Village Zoning District for the property located at 140 North Maple Street, be approved as filed and based upon the findings of fact as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations, Mr. Schaefer.
Thank you.
I wish we had a medal to give you as well. For kind of a Purple Heart looking thing without.
Right.
To go with the purple Barney barn.
Oh, yes, yeah. We can give you a
Thank you.
picture of the
Good evening.
purple Barney barn. Thank you and good luck with your house. Okay, what else do we need to do, Wayne?
Just to run through real quick, the Fisher Homes, the Ansley Park status of the amended plat that just sits on your agenda. simply because that project has now become a legacy project, a zombie subdivision, as some jurisdictions refer to it, as we hope to see the landowner work through their issues to get that project closed out. Oak Street, Oak Center Food, we'll need the findings of fact signed. We're working on Jay Williams' right to farm and the other commitments getting those executed. In fact, Mr. Oakes is our applicant, and Mr. Gill as well. We just have 2 sets of findings that need to get signed off on, as well as the collection of findings down by Larry's World, if you will, to review tonight. I do want to note for the record that with the denial of B&D and the cell tower variance, we would need negative findings of fact authored for those particular matters. So I don't know if we'd want to technically continue those 2 items on the agenda to allow for negative findings of fact to be prepared and adopted at a future meeting. Typically, those are prepared by council.
That sounds great,
Okay.
Wayne.
Excellent.
Let's do that.
Okay.
Hey, question, the Tarasi subdivision, those commitments, we were talking that you made some mention they haven't been recorded yet?
Well, those are the covenants. The Durasi project, I don't recall offhand any commitments per se, but with their private covenants, we simply just have not been furnished a copy of the recorded document of that, nor I would say is that customarily something that somebody does for us. If we want them, we will eventually gather them from a particular landowner that wants to share them with us, or we can venture up to the courthouse and collect them ourselves.
But it's not something they're required to do and provide us?
Not at this time. It's certainly just like when somebody records a plat, we encourage them to bring us a copy. 98% of our customers bring us a copy. Occasionally we have to collect it ourselves, but we do try to build that record because it only helps the homeowners. It only helps people in the future when we have those records here locally. But then again, as those documents are amended, we might not have the freshest version because we're not the homeowner association.
Okay. Anything else we need to officially act on here tonight?
I am not aware of anything else.
Let the record reflect we're ending just shy of 9 o'clock.
So,
You know how fast I drove home from Fort Wayne to actually from
No.
Detroit?
Whoa,
Turn off the microphone.
The mic's still on.
the record, nobody's discussing Williamson.
No, we're off. We're adjourned. So you,
I came back from Detroit today,
as quickly as you could.
like about 95 miles an hour. This is awful.
I can't miss this. I can't miss this. But we appreciate your diligence.
I'm officially not here July 10th. Is everybody, this is my week to be on the boat. So is everybody else going to be here?
On a boat.
Yeah.
The 10th?
I think so.
As far as I know.
Yeah, I'm gonna miss all the excitement, which is a little disappointing.
So you could have mentioned that earlier as we're doing all